As we sit here meditating, we're focusing on something that nobody else can know. How our bodies feel from the inside, how our awareness feels from the inside. It's an area that we don't pay that much attention to. And for that reason we don't have much of a vocabulary to describe what's going on. But it's our most immediate experience. After all, it's on this level of experience that we actually feel pain and suffering, which, as the Buddha said, is the big issue in life. But not only that, we're also experiencing the causes of that pain and suffering from within. And we can manipulate them, we can do something about them from within. That's the important part of his teachings. He's not trying to solve our sufferings by changing the world outside. And it's nothing that anybody from outside can come in and do for us. We're actually doing the things right now that are adding stress and disturbance to our awareness. But the fact that we're doing it means we can learn how not to do it. And we also learn how to change things from within. Again, this goes against the materialist idea that the consciousness is just a byproduct of physical processes, and it's the physical processes that determine everything. From our point of view as meditators, that's not the case. You change your focus, you change your object of concentration, you actually can create little worlds in here. We're watching the creations of worlds sometimes as we stay here with the breath. We're trying to create a sense of inhabiting this world inside the body. But we can also see little thoughts running off, and it's easy to get into them and suddenly go with them. The Buddha has a long description of the various ways in which we create suffering within. And it's so long that people get involved in the intricacies and they can't see the forest for the trees. So some of the major features get ignored. And one of the big features is that consciousness, he says, is caused, but it doesn't need a body. It feeds on conditions. And as long as it's feeding on these conditions, it's going to keep going, regardless of whether there's a body or not. Some of the conditions are physical, and one of the foods for consciousness is actually physical food. But there are other foods for consciousness as well. It's because we cling to these things, we crave these things, that we keep going, even when we can't stay here anymore. So it's good to know this process now, so we'll be more in control, not only as we're living our lives now, but also when we have to leave the body. We have to look at the way our awareness feeds on things and what it's feeding on, and learn to comprehend that food. So at the very least we can be selective eaters, and at best we can go beyond that, where there is a level of consciousness that doesn't have to feed, doesn't need conditions. That's where there's no pain or distress or suffering at all. But if we can't reach that level yet, well, learn how to be selective in how you feed. The three mental kinds of food are contact, the intentions of the heart, and consciousness itself. In other words, one act of consciousness can provide the food for another act of consciousness. This consciousness is self-reflective. We can reflect on our awareness. We can reflect on the way we know things. And because of that, we can feed off of one moment of consciousness to the next. This is why consciousness can keep going, and why it has been going on, as the Buddha says, from an unimaginable beginning. So look right now, what are you feeding on? There are two ways to notice what you're feeding on. One is to notice what you're doing as you try to get the mind into concentration. The other is noticing how you feed on things that pull you away. We're feeding on the breath right now. There's an intention to keep us here. And then there's the context, where you feel the breath. How does it feel right now? You can use your intentions to adjust the breath. As the Buddha said, this is probably the best food for the consciousness that needs a kind of food, because it's relatively harmless. And it really gives a lot of good nourishment to the mind. It really strengthens the mind, because there are foods for consciousness that are like junk food. Whole cupfuls of sugar in a little can of soda. Or huge amounts of fat in hamburgers and fries. Well, the mind has that kind of has that kind of food as well. We feed off our fantasy worlds, lust, anger. We get some energy out of these things, but it's an energy that, one, wears the mind down, and two, gets it used to really bad habits. Because as you feed on these kinds of thoughts, it's very easy for them to move into things you talk about, things you want to act on. And so what you're feeding on is pretty much going to determine where you're going to go, because you look for that kind of food more and more. So this is why the Buddha gives us an alternative kind of food, the sense of well-being that comes from learning how to be centered within, and not looking for the kind of entertainment that comes from thinking about the past, thinking about the future. Because you're thinking about the past and future a lot. It's not just entertainment. A lot of times you start worrying about the past and future. So learn how to settle in right here for the time being, and learn how to feed off the present moment, so you can get the mind really still. And it's when it's still that you can start seeing these processes a lot more clearly, both the process of distraction and the processes of feeding on the sense of well-being right here, right now. Because when you understand contact, as the Buddha said, when you really comprehend it, you comprehend three kinds of feelings. In other words, you comprehend the way pain comes, the way pleasure comes, the way feelings of neither pleasure nor pain come. And to comprehend them means that you see the extent to which there's an intentional element there. We have lots of potentials for pleasure or pain in different parts of the body. But we have our choice, which ones you're going to focus on. How are you going to focus on them? What are you going to do with them? Which ones do you want to develop? Which ones do you just want to leave aside? Because there are some pleasures that are good for the mind and others that are not. Some pains are good for the mind, others are not. Some types of equanimity are good, others are not. And you want to learn, if I focus on this kind of pleasure or this kind of pain, what does it do to the mind? What kind of actions does it lead to? If it leads to unskillful qualities, so you want to abandon that kind of focus. And you begin to see the extent to which you have your choices here. It helps to pull your identification away from these pleasures and pains, because for most of us it's our feelings that we identify with more than anything else. That's who we really are. How do you really feel, people will ask. But when you begin to see that it's a fabricated process and it's an element of choice, that sense that this is the real you, or what you really believe deep down inside, or you really crave deep down inside, you begin to pull away. You're not a sucker for pleasure so much anymore. In that way, that drive to feed off these things gets a lot weaker. As for the intentions of the heart, again, you're focusing on intention right now, your intention to stay with the breath. But you can also see that there are other urges that will pull you away. You want to learn how to comprehend those. In comprehending those, the Buddha says you learn how to comprehend craving. craving for sensuality, the craving for becoming, i.e. you want to take on an identity in a particular world, or non-becoming. You decide you don't like the identity you have, you want to find something else. This can happen on the macro level and also the micro level inside the mind. And you want to see what's driving that, because there's a desire behind all these things. Your sense of identity is based on the things you want. If you desire alcohol, you become an alcoholic, and the world that you live in is one where alcohol is a big issue. And the things that help you gain it are things you notice, and things that get in the way are also things you notice. If you desire status, okay, the question is what other people think about you. How can you look good in their eyes? Their eyes suddenly become an important part of the world. And you become the kind of person that's craving to look good in other people's eyes. Is that the kind of person you want to be? Because sometimes we have a desire and we don't reflect on what is this desire making us? What kind of people are we becoming? As the Buddha said, one of the things you should reflect on every day as days and nights fly past, fly past. What am I becoming as time passes away? And it's all based on the desires that drive you, or the desires that you feed on. And when you can see that these things give a little bit of pleasure, but they give a lot of pain, and have a lot of drawbacks, you can draw back from your identification with them. Then there's the food of consciousness itself. One of our biggest fears is that with death, consciousness gets wiped out. And so whatever kind of consciousness we can find, we'll just keep going for it. And it keeps landing on things like a body, or feelings, or perceptions, fabrications. What the Buddha calls the five aggregates. In other words, the five activities that the mind employs in order to go around feeding. There's a feeling of pain, you feel a hunger. You want to find something to satisfy it, to have a more pleasant feeling. There's the perception of what you need to satisfy that hunger, and then you look around trying to find things that fit in with that perception. Then all the activities, the intentions to go after that. And then the consciousness that feeds on all these things. You want to look at this process to see that there's a lot of feeding going on, and there's a lot of suffering going on. There's nothing much accomplished, because it's an endless process. Think about the feeding of the body. You put things into your stomach to fill it up, well, they don't stay. And you have to go around searching for these things, and your drive to eat, your craving to eat, can take you to a lot of undesirable places. Well, it's the same with this craving in the mind. The craving for more feelings, more perceptions, more fabrications. When you comprehend that, the Buddha says you comprehend what he calls name and form. In other words, all the kinds of things, physical and mental, that the mind could be feeding on. And when you really comprehend it, that's when you realize there's another kind of consciousness, as I said, that doesn't need to feed. No more desires to be anybody in any particular world. When those cravings go, then you can open up to this other level of consciousness. And you realize that the Buddha was right. This really is the end of suffering. There is no hunger there at all. No suffering, no stress. That's the ultimate goal. In the meantime, though, you want to learn how to be more selective in how your mind feeds, and realize that you have choices. All too often we're driven by our old habits. The habit of the mind that likes to engage, say, in lust, and the habit of the mind that likes to engage in anger. the habit of the mind that's afraid that it won't be something, so it just keeps creating more and more and more identities. And then complaining about the suffering that comes as a result. At least try to be as selective as you can what you're going to feed on, because there are some states of mind that really are, like the state of concentration, that really are harmless, peaceful, nourishing for the mind. You want to focus on those. This is another aspect of the Buddhist description of suffering and the causes of suffering as they're felt from inside. Is that you choose to take on identities, you choose to inhabit different worlds, but you can also choose not to if you want. This becomes especially relevant as the body ages and death approaches. You can really fully identify yourself with this person in this body and suffer an awful lot. Or you can become aware of that aspect of consciousness that doesn't have to identify here, doesn't have to identify with the processes. It can simply watch them as processes. That's a skill that's really worth developing, and we're doing it as we meditate here. See the process of distraction, and you can pull out. See the mind going for something. See the mind going for something and decide, I don't want to go there, and you can drop it. And looking at all the whispers and shouts and other things in the mind that say, no, no, you've got to do this. This is who you are. If you're not this, who are you? You're nothing. Don't listen to those. There's a lot more to the mind. There's a lot more to consciousness than who you think you are and where you think you are. So be open to that possibility, because it opens up a lot of freedom inside your awareness, inside this awareness as it's experienced from within, right here, right now. It can free you from a lot of suffering and pain.